Hello, and I'm back. So it's 24 hours later. I spoke to you guys yesterday on what to expect in the debate hosted by Politico and PBS. And here I am. I've since showered and I'm coming to you fresh. I'm wearing a nice Christmas sweater. I hope you guys do like it. Yeah, this is the last video I'm making before the holidays and possibly before the new year. I might do something in the lead up to 2020, January 1st, 2020. Not really sure exactly. I might do something on impeachment since yesterday after the House voted, I actually had so many friends and family texting me and asking me what the hell was going on. The thing that surprised me the most about impeachment was just the word impeachment being out in the public sphere. It gets people thinking about things in a whole other way, gets people really paying attention. People that I didn't think were actually paying attention, they are now paying attention. So, on one hand, prior to everything, and I'll just go into this really quick before I get into the debate stuff, but prior to the vote, I was like, people aren't paying attention. It's probably going to get knocked down in the Senate. I still think that he won't get convicted, but just because there are more eyes, more people holding the press, the media, the president accountable now, the dynamic is kind of changing. So there's a lot to be seen, a lot to be said coming in the future. But anyways, what happened tonight at the Democratic debate shows that no matter what, things still go on. They did talk about the impeachment. They didn't dwell on it. I liked how they asked one question in the beginning, unlike the MSNBC debate where they asked each candidate an individual question. On this one, they asked one question to everyone and kind of just went down the line, got everyone's take. And it didn't take as long as the MSNBC debate did when they were talking about the then inquiry into impeachment, but now the actual vote on impeachment. So that was good. Anyways, I'm going to break it down like this. We're going to be organized today. We're going to make it, I don't know how long it'll take, but hopefully I'll be a bit quicker than I have been in the past. But I'm going to talk about my biggest takeaways, who the winners and losers were, anything else that I wish had happened, and then I'm going to go one by one with the candidates. The good thing about having 7 people on stage was I don't have to cover anyone but the 7 people. Even still, 7 people is a lot. And, we didn't get too nitty gritty with policy, but we did get to see the candidates make the stark differences between themselves. This was a more enjoyable debate than the other ones have been in the past, I think. But anyways, my takeaways. Big 3 takeaways. Number 1, it was ladies' night tonight. The ladies, Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Senator Amy Klobuchar, they had great performances. My second big takeaway was that Pete Buttigieg got taken down by a mob. It was vicious. As Van Joan likes to call him, Pistol Pete. Pistol Pete got pistol whipped by almost everyone on stage. So it was pretty bad, pretty nasty. Not nasty, but I think it might have been effective. And then third takeaway, I already talked about this. There were less people. There was more time for peripheral candidates, the ones that were on the sides, literally Andrew Yang and Tom Steyer. They got to shine more. And I have to say, I forget whether she's with Politico or with PBS, but Amna Nawaz, she was a very effective and impressive moderator. She held the candidates to a high standard. She didn't let them get away with not answering, and she pressed them. The winners tonight, I got to say, were Andrew Yang, Elizabeth Warren, and Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren more so. Andrew Yang had a great performance. There were strong showings, I think, by Bernie Sanders and Tom Steyer. Joe Biden, I think he was just flat. There's a lot of stuff policy-wise I disagree with him on. I might get into some of that. And I don't think that people went after him the way that they should have. But Mayor Pete, I think, was the loser tonight. Yeah, those were my winners, losers. I wish, though, they asked about healthcare at the end, and they, because there's less candidates, I think they could have had a more robust conversation on the topic. But they asked at the end. I don't know how long it went. I don't know if it went more than 5 minutes, and it just turned into Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders going after each other on it. And so there wasn't room for people to flush out the details. And I think that's where candidates that I like Bernie Sanders, I think that's where he wins the debate on healthcare when you talk about the details and the statistics and what people are actually going through. Sorry, I'm just looking down. I added a screen to my setup so I could actually make sure that everything's recording fine and everything. So I'm getting a little more technical here. So don't mind if my eyes wander a little bit here and then there. Anyways, so Elizabeth Warren, I say she was a winner tonight. The reason why she was a winner was she stays 100% on message. And what is her message? Her message is it's the corruption, stupid. So it's very simple. Everything she says, she brings it back, ties it back into corruption and big money influence and how big money buys influence. Um, Let me see. So even when they were talking about the climate crisis, she talked about corruption and the big money influence of fossil fuels. Let's see, they asked a question about, and this was kind of a layup to Elizabeth Warren and to Amy Klobuchar, but they asked a question about Barack Obama recently being quoted as saying if women were leaders all around the world would be a much better place. But what she did, it was really unprompted. I don't think there was any reason for her to bring it up, but she knew she had to bring it up some way or other. So at that moment, she was like, "Oh, I think when he said that, he was talking about, the way that women are financing their campaigns or something along those lines." So she got right into talking about campaign finance. And that's where she exacted the first, I don't know if it was the first, it wasn't the first, but that's when she exacted her first attack on Mayor Pete. She called Mayor Pete's campaign a traditional campaign, of where people go to, Democrats go from coast to coast talking to big money donors behind closed doors, and that's how they win the presidency. They buy political influence. But she tied it to corruption as well, and that's why government is so corrupted, because big money comes from these giant corporations. These giant corporations can then influence. I mean, there's been reports recently about Mayor Pete having backdoor conversations with Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. So this is she was like insinuating stuff about Mayor Pete, but it was interesting how she just kind of brought it out up front. The other thing too, she had really done a great job of like describing the way that Mayor Pete is fundraising. She was talking about the reports of him going to these like crystal wine caves to talk to rich people and get their money. So that was really a really effective attack by her. And then another interesting thing, I won't say it's good or bad, but I mentioned in the prior video to this that Elizabeth Warren and Andrew Yang should not attack each other. They shouldn't go after each other. When they do, it becomes a really technical fight. And weirdly enough, when they were talking about gifting and the holiday spirit, that like silly question at the end that was irrelevant, Andrew Yang talked about how he gifted Elizabeth Warren his book and how she was reading it, and they kind of did. I don't know if they didn't really thumbs up, but they like gestured towards each other like cool, and it just looked like they had a little bromance. But like, I know that she's not a dude, so like I can't say that she's in a bromance, but just a little like thing going on between them, and I think that it's kind of that thing of like real recognize real. Not that I'm saying she's super real or that he is, but they're kind of on the same wavelength in terms of the way that they're approaching policies and the way that they're approaching problems. So the bad thing, I don't know if it's necessarily bad, but she and Amy Klobuchar did a little bit of the woke feminist cultural signaling, I guess, in front of a Democratic crowd that might work. So it was I would say, but nothing particularly wrong with it. There was like in terms of the saying, "Oh, I'm so excited to say when." Uh, what was she saying? She was saying that referring to the president when she gets to the White House. That's what she was saying exactly. So that's what I meant by that. Amy Klobuchar, the other one that I think won tonight. During the discussion on healthcare, she had this phrase, and it was really interesting because she didn't attack Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren like she did in the past. She didn't even attack Joe Biden, really. But while talking about healthcare, she said we can be progressive but practical. And being that she got so much talking time, and being that she was there and that's she's giving her opinion the whole time, and that she said that phrase, that's what I think really defined her and defined her campaign. And those are the moments that the mainstream media really likes. So I'm not saying that she's either progressive or practical myself. I don't know her policies too well, but her rejection of Medicare for all, her rejection of free public college, lets me to believe that she's definitely not progressive, and not being for Medicare for all is neither practical either, because healthcare is so bureaucratic without a single payer system. But she's trying to brand herself, and that's the way that you do it. You get these little sound bites, you get the talking time, the media is going to eat it up. I think she's going to see a little surge in the polling, possibly. And she's definitely going to see more enthusiasm in the mainstream media for her. Let me see. Yeah, she didn't attack the leftists on the stage, Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, and she didn't attack experience either. In fact, she talked a lot about her legislative record. Basically, on every issue, she would talk about the things that she's done in the Senate. But what she did do was she did attack Mayor Pete, and that was smart of her, because I think that's where she could actually siphon some support. But hold on to that, because I'll talk about it later. Let me see what else I wrote. Yeah, she spoke about working with the senators. She referred to Bernie Sanders, to Elizabeth Warren a few times. And then she knocked Mayor Pete, because Mayor Pete had previously dissed the collective experience that was on the stage. She spoke very highly of the colleagues. And this is the issue. So will she actually be able to siphon the support? I don't know if it's too little too late. It's December. The first votes are going to be cast in the Iowa caucus in February. I don't know if she's done that well. And being that, it's December right now, so maybe she'll have a surge December into January. The mainstream media's attention for these candidates, like when Elizabeth Warren was flavor of the month, Mayor Pete was flavor of the month at one time, Kamala Harris, these things don't last. So I don't know if that will last into actual votes being cast. So I'm not too sure how effective it's going to be. One thing I didn't notice, I watched it with my sister, and my sister was next to me, and she said that she noticed that Amy Klobuchar talked a lot about Donald Trump, and a lot of her answers. I didn't particularly notice, but even I guess when she was talking about foreign policy, that's where my sister noticed. She's like, she's bringing up Trump all the time. So, for a Democratic crowd, maybe that's good, but I don't know. I just feel like when you put everything on Trump, yes, we have to call out Trump's bad policies where we can, but the whole issue should not be about Donald Trump. One thing was that in the not the very beginning, but towards the beginning, they had asked not all the candidates, Bernie Sanders at first, about whether he supports the MCA, the Mexico-Canada agreement, I think. It's basically Trump undoing NAFTA and then wanting to draft a new agreement. And Bernie Sanders basically called it the new NAFTA. and said he wasn't going to vote for it. But Amy Klobuchar interjected, said, there are a few improvements from NAFTA, so I am going to vote for it. I haven't looked into MCA a lot myself, so I would have liked to hear a more robust conversation on that specific topic, what that trade deal would entail and stuff. I guess they're going to be voting on it soon, so I wish that we could have seen a little bit interaction there. Andrew Yang, another winner tonight. Look, he's very simple, he's very practical, and it shows when he answers the questions and he addresses problems. In the past, everyone's been saying, okay, he doesn't get enough time to speak, but I think I'm noticing something. I think that he actually doesn't like to speak that much. I don't get me wrong, he definitely wants to have as much time on the screen as possible, and I think this is part of his appeal, that when they ask him a question, he will answer it. And if he's done answering, he's not going to just stand there and talk about whatever it is. His points are very simple, very clear. He gets to it and he gets done with it. The other thing too, he's quite self-deprecating, which I think is a quality everyone loves. So when they asked about impeachment, I thought it was interesting because he was really the only one to address the question. The question, if I'm correct, I believe it was, how do you convince Americans for the need of impeachment? I guess they were invoking how this time that we're impeaching someone, Americans are not as much behind it. We're only 50% behind it, which is crazy to think that they're saying that that's such a low figure. 50% of the country wants you out of the office. That's a pretty bad thing, in my opinion. But anyways, they asked, how do you convince Americans the need for impeachment? And what he did, he didn't answer how we do it, but he stood there and he was the only one to say why it is that Americans are quite divided on this. And it's because we have these crazy media corporations and media corruption where people can go get any kind of news that they want to satisfy whatever it is that they believe anyways. So that was, it's not that his ability to answer that question that impressed me. It was the ability to address the problem. And he always keeps that front of mind. So that was great. And they also brought up, how do you defeat Donald Trump when, economic indicators are good? And this is one thing I personally love about Andrew Yang. When talking about economic indicators, he always shifts the conversation. He says, okay, you could talk about good economic indicators as much as you want. Why don't we talk about good life indicators instead? So he started talking about depression, suicide rates, drug addiction, all these things, rather than focusing on this good economy. So he's like, yeah, okay, so I forget if it was, it's not that wages are, unemployment is relatively low, but people are depressed, people are not feeling great about themselves. So that was fantastic. And then he kind of did the same thing when they were talking about how to bring special needs people into the workforce, and what do you have any policies to do that. So he again shifted the conversation to, like, why is it that we have to somehow find economic value in every single person? Why do we need to, we see someone with special needs and we're like, oh, what is it that they're actually contributing to the economy? Why don't we look at them and see the human value in them? So it's more than just a political conversation. Andrew Yang is really bringing a spiritual conversation to the debate stage, which I think we all need to be having with each other as well. We really are a society that's focused on economics, on the dollar, and it's bullshit. Like, just because someone doesn't have the capacity to earn a dollar doesn't say anything about who they are as a person. So that was fantastic. Another thing that I think, when he was asked about being the only person of color candidate on stage, he was like, oh, it's kind of sad that Cory Booker isn't here and that Kamala Harris ended her campaign. But what he ended up talking about was that he shifted it back to UBI, Universal Basic Income, and he talked about democracy dollars and how, okay, if we actually started giving people, it wasn't UBI. Democracy dollars is something different. Democracy dollars is public financing of campaigns, giving people money, free money to donate to campaigns and candidates that they like. Then we're going to see people being able to publicly finance more candidates of colors and candidates of color and candidates that look like the communities that represent them. So great job, Andrew Yang. One bad thing that I think that he talked about was when they asked the question, should we be helping to relocate people in the wake of the climate crisis that the country is facing? He answered right after Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders had an excellent answer, which was, why are we talking about relocating? To get to we need to fix this crisis. We need to nip it in the bud before we get to the point where we have to relocate people in Miami, people in Louisiana, and all these things. So he was saying that we need to move everyone to higher ground, and that this is already taking place in some areas of Louisiana where the water levels are rising. To me, it just sounded a little off coming right after Bernie Sanders' great answer. Mayor Pete, I don't think he did well tonight. There was a lot of hot air that came out of him talking about unity and not and trying to avoid extremes, like he was saying in terms of, you know, he sees like health, Medicare for all as extreme, that we have to find somewhere in the middle between prosperity for corporations and prosperity for the American people. So that stuff was good that he did. So he did do a lot of that, and that's what I said that he needed to do for this debate. Just continue, blowing hot air, saying nothing really. But he got attacked, and so he didn't he did fight back, but I don't think he had any really good defense of those attacks. Let me see. So the attack that Elizabeth Warren put on him in terms of his campaign finance, look, he tried to wiggle his way out of it. He tried to put it back on Elizabeth Warren, talking about her net worth and everything. I just think that overall the attack was so genius of her, because for him it looks so bad, and this populist environment that we're living in as a country. So yeah, and then also the other thing with Elizabeth Warren was that when he went after her wealth, I think people just have more sense. She's a 70-year-old woman, and she's had a career as a Harvard professor and then an activist and all these things. So she definitely. I mean, actually, I don't know how much she's actually worth. I don't know if her husband is worth a lot of money, but look, she's had like 40, 50 years of earning in order to have the wealth that she has. Whereas Mayor Pete, for the last 10, 15 years, he's been able to build up, he and his husband's, what do you call it, net worth. Yeah. So, anyways, let's go back to how they attacked him. At first, Tom Steyer tried to attack Mayor Pete on climate. He was saying, "Oh, well, you're the generation that's going to be most impacted, and I wish that you would prioritize climate more." That was weak. That was just weak. I mean, Tom Steyer did a good job this debate, but that was weak and really ineffective. But then came Elizabeth Warren, and she had the real attacks on how he had meetings with rich people in what she called crystal wine caves. And I just like, I don't know. It was just, I was watching it, I was laughing. I was like, this is crazy. She's talking about crystal wine caves, like really painting him to be out of touch with the American people. And so then, like, yeah, he came back by attacking her own wealth, which I think fell really flat. But then Amy Klobuchar, she like piped in. She's like, I don't even know what a wine cave is, which was really hilarious. And then, okay, so like Elizabeth Warren, she kind of buttered him up, but then Bernie Sanders came in for the kill. And I don't think Bernie Sanders even meant it like for the kill, but I think he put a fork in him with this one. Yeah, so he talked about the billionaire donors, and he was like saying there are a few people on this stage. He's like, Joe Biden, you have 44 billionaire donors. And then he said, uh, Pete Buttigieg, like, I know you're pretty competitive, and I know that it's probably irking you don't have as many, but you have 39. And he was like, yeah, you could, I know how competitive you are. You might want to catch up to Joe Biden. Very sarcastic, very effective. Mayor Pete was kind of smiling. There just was no response for it. He didn't have anything to say after that. And they took him down. I think that he's going to actually, I wouldn't say a plunge, but in the coming weeks, I think we're going to see the numbers go down for Mayor Pete. Maybe go up for Amy Klobuchar as a result, or Tom Steyer a little bit. But I think we're gonna start seeing him go down a little in the polls. They really painted him out to be quite out of touch, and it was effective. Oh yeah, and then Amy Klobuchar also skillfully, she did this like real. She was very careful about this because in prior debates, Mayor Pete had dissed all the candidates for their collective over 100 years of experience, and he was like, that's not what Washington needs. They need, fresh blood and everything. But she did it in a way that she knew that she went after his experience as mayor. She didn't want to seem like she didn't care about small towns like South Bend, Indiana, and she didn't want to either diss his record as serving in the military. So she did it more in a way that she was just kind of saying that experience is a good thing, but not. She didn't just talk about experience. She talked about Bernie Sanders specifically and how he worked worked in the Senate to help with veterans benefits. She talked about Elizabeth Warren's activism in consumer financial reform and everything. So that was also a very effective attack on Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete still sounds very rehearsed. I'm not even going to get into his issues with race, but he still sounds rehearsed on race, which means that he is trying to get beyond it, but it still sounds rehearsed. He sounded best tonight when he talked about rallying behind the nomination. I don't know if that was the gift question or if that was the closing statement, but that's where he sounded best. And that was more of the unity bullshit, but that's where he actually sounded authentic. So let's see what actually happens. Bernie Sanders did a great job tonight. I'm not sure I have too much to say, but there were a few interesting things with him. The simplicity of his message was most apparent on the question on his age. They asked him and Elizabeth Warren and I think Joe Biden about being the potentially oldest to be inaugurated as president, and he said it's not about young versus old. It's not about male versus female for the nominee. He says that the real issue is that it's working class versus a billionaire class that buys influence in Washington, D.C., and that we really need to have a bottom-up change. So again, his message, very simple and very effectively communicated. Oh yeah, and back to how Bernie Sanders, when he attacked Mayor Pete, and he talked about, he was being very sarcastic about the billionaires, and he said, but look, this is why 3 people own more wealth in the United States than the bottom half of the country. So it was good that he used a very sarcastic way of dissing his opponents, but then he translated it to the thing that he says over and over and over again: 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half. It was fantastic that he did it using the people on stage, the people that he wants to beat for the nomination. So that was good. Another amazing thing that Bernie did, and I kind of jumped out of my chair when he did it. He called Benjamin Netanyahu a racist. Finally. So this is not, I don't need to go into the details of the whole issue with Palestine, Israel. But this is why Bernie Sanders is such an effective fundraiser. He's going to get a lot of fundraising by the populist message that he has as it is, talking about, the top three owning more wealth than the bottom half. But he's also going to get a lot of fundraising from citizens of the United States who are concerned about foreign affairs, foreign influence and stuff. And this is one hot button issue. People are passionate about Palestinian justice. And the way that he's the only one I've ever heard talk about Benjamin Netanyahu like this. Let's not forget that in 2015, while Hillary Clinton was putting together her campaign for president, she had written an op-ed. She volunteered this op-ed talking about how much she admired Benjamin Netanyahu. And to go 4 years later to the place on the stage for the Democratic debates where a candidate like Bernie Sanders is calling Benjamin Netanyahu what he is, a racist, is fantastic. I loved it. And I know a lot of people loved it. Bernie was great on the issues. He was great talking about climate, about immigration, about DACA, what he would do on his first day, reinstating status for DACA immigrants. And then he also made a good case for education when Mayor Pete was talking about, we don't want to have access to free public college for the rich. Bernie Sanders was talking about public goods and the universality of them and how even Trump's children should be able to have access to public goods like education. So that was a really good message on that. Let me see. Bernie Sanders also made the case for his electability after Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar were having their little spat, where they were talking. Amy Klobuchar was making the case for experience, and then Mayor Pete was like, "Well, I have experience too." Bernie Sanders comes in and is like, "Well, I'm the one that has more donations than anyone in the history of presidential campaigns." So he's talking about his electability. The only thing, he wasn't going after the electability of Joe Biden, which is what I said he needed to do in the last video. The good moment that Bernie Sanders had was when when him and Joe Biden were debating Medicare for all, and Bernie Sanders literally just turned to him, looked him in the eye, and made the case for Medicare for all. And I feel like we need to see more of that happen, because we're only getting like a few sound bites, like 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there. They state their case. They don't really get to discuss, because Joe Biden came in with like, it's going to cost $30 trillion. I know Bernie Sanders wanted to come back and say, well, it's going to cost $50 trillion to not do it. I know that's what he wanted to do, but we don't actually get to see that debate go deep. And this is just an aside. I actually think it would be nice if we had full debates, 2-3 hour debates on specific issues, because healthcare is so profound. If we actually had a debate on it, we could talk about so many things. There's so many things that intersect. You could talk about race and healthcare, immigration and healthcare, healthcare and economics. That's where Elizabeth Warren's message comes in. There's so much that you could do. We really should be having a robust conversation on that. There was a very slight uneasy moment for Bernie Sanders when they had asked the question about candidates of color being on the stage and not represented. And he said, look, I want to go back and talk about climate change. And then Amna Nawaz, she's a great moderator. She said, with all due respect, I want you to answer the question about people of color. But he was making the point that climate change most affects people of color. So the crowd started clapping for Amna Nawaz for kind of reeling in the debate. But look, Bernie knows what he's doing. He doesn't avoid questions. He just wants to really, he wants to show that the things that he supports actually support people of color. They make the biggest impact for people of color in this country. One minor bad thing for Bernie was that Amna Nawaz, she's relentless. She's fantastic at what she does, and she exposed a little bit of Bernie Sanders' record in voting for Afghanistan, and then making him admit that that was a mistake. But he admitted that it was a mistake, and then he referred to Barbara Lee, who I think is a congresswoman, and how she was the only one that voted against Afghanistan, and she was right. But when it comes to all other, oh yeah, and she also mentioned something about Bernie Sanders. I think maybe voting to fund. I'm not sure of all military budgets. I'm gonna have to look into this. I mean, these are the things that moderators and journalists should be doing, making their records available for all of us to see. Doesn't mean that I it's gonna take away my support for Bernie Sanders. I doubt it, but I want to know the full record. I want to see everything about everyone at this point. So good on her for bringing it up. Joe Biden, I think he kind of stayed flat. I don't think he did really bad. Look, there's things that I completely disagree with him upon, but he bullshitted enough um, to show that he didn't. How do I say this best? He did a good job of just talking in generality, to the point where he doesn't really reveal too much detail about his record. And even the things that he says it in a way that kind of makes people like, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. But you have to scratch a little bit. And then once you scratch and you see what he's really talking about, that's where you look and you're like, this is kind of scary. So they asked him about Guantanamo Bay and why it stayed open even though Barack Obama had promised to close it. So he said that it stayed open because Congress was responsible for closing it down, which is not true. Barack Obama had done an executive order, but the executive order had asked all these agencies to look into closing Guantanamo Bay. So then by the time that he started it, look, from my understanding of it, I could be wrong, but he could have created a completely different executive order and just had, pinned it to one agency and told them that I want this shut down in a year, and that never happened. And then the other thing was, oh yeah, I forget if it was Amna Nawaz, but yes, it was Amna Nawaz. She asked the question about Afghanistan, the new Washington Post report that said that the Obama administration pressed the NSA, the National Security Agency, to produce positive figures with regards to the surge in Afghanistan. And he just totally evaded the question. I forget what he even said, but he evaded the question completely. And I think that Amna Nawaz just didn't have the time to follow up on it. But this is the problem, like with running on Barack Obama's record. So he wants to take all the good things that Barack Obama did, like the Iran nuclear deal or Obamacare, but he doesn't want to deal with any of the criticism. So that's very interesting about Joe Biden. That's one thing I don't like. But it's crazy because he's just effectively hiding behind Obama's presidency with it. Also, when they were talking about foreign policy, he was talking about China's human rights abuses in Hong Kong and with the Muslim Uyghur community. And this was so interesting. So he was saying that we need to start having a stronger military presence in the Pacific region, in the Pacific Ocean. Start sending our military to the waters out there. Like, I don't know how the media is going to react, but I saw this. I was like, what the fuck? Like, are you encouraging like I don't know, drumming up military action to like threaten China? Like, this is crazy. That's his instinct. Now, I don't know how it's going to appeal to the American people. It does kind of it does kind of get at maybe the warmongering instincts of a lot of people. But then again, we've been at war for 18 years now. I don't know if people are finally sick of being at war, that if they hear this kind of rhetoric, they're just going to be like, no, we don't want this. But this shows that Joe Biden is all about maintaining the military industrial complex. So, no to Joe. Everyone beware of him. Keep your eyes out when he's talking about foreign policy, especially in these kinds of ways. It was also interesting when he was debating with Bernie Sanders about healthcare. He was like, Bernie, put your hand down. You couldn't see Bernie's hand. Like, Bernie does this all the time. Excuse me, like to get in on the debate. But Joe was talking about healthcare and Bernie's hand is up. You don't see it on the screen, but Joe said, he said, like, put your hand down, Bernie. Which is funny because the media paints Bernie to be some like grumpy old man, but there Joe Biden is looking like the grumpy old man. And Bernie had this like really funny, jolly response. He's like, I'm just waving at you, Joe. I'm just waving at you, saying hello. So Bernie is a lot jollier than the media paints him out to be. And then the last thing that was interesting, this really doesn't have anything to do with much with Joe Biden, but Joe said they were talking about immigration, and he said like immigrants are ready to work like the devil. Is that like a phrase or something? Like someone who works like the devil? I don't know. That was just funny to me. And then oh yeah, they were talking about like shifting demographics in the United States, more people of color, more immigrants, people from different countries. And then Joe Biden like said, just like I think they asked, what would you say to people about that? And he say, I would tell them get used to it. And I don't know, just it's funny. It wasn't bad or good. It reminds me of my dad a little bit, to be honest. Like there's some kind of authority that comes from an older man being able to say something like that in a very blunt kind of way where it's not, it's abrasive, but like it's not offensive. But I just feel like when you tell people to just get used to it, you're not really getting at the problem. You're not, and the problem is that Donald Trump has told people for however many years now that immigrants are taking jobs away from them. Immigrants are the problem. And you're not addressing the real problem, which is that our economy is shifting towards more automation, and that's why there are less jobs. And we have these international agreements that are shipping our jobs overseas. So the whole get used to it thing, while it just tells people like, come on, go with the program, it's not really addressing the issue. That's my issue with it. Last one, Tom Steyer. I think he had a good performance. I didn't write down too much because it's too much to like write down. Oh, he was good on climate. He was good on this. He was good on that. And like he said this about that. It was good, but it wasn't too interesting. I think the fact that he had more time there, he got to show people who he was. I think he and Amy Klobuchar actually might be running for like a cabinet position or a vice presidency or something. But I do remember Tom Steyer spoke very practically on nuclear energy and that we could do a lot with wind, solar, and batteries. I also thought it was very effective and nice that he said that Trump's immigration policies were racist, that he doesn't have a problem with immigration from white countries, but he does from brown and black countries. He did refer a lot to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and their policies and the work that they've done. And I think he's doing that because that's the only way that he's going to really shake the stigma of being the sole billionaire on stage. I don't think he carries billionaire guilt, but I think that he understands the problem of him being a billionaire on stage and needing to relate to everyone and show them that he's the guy that they want to vote for. So that's all I got for today. I hope I broke it down good enough for you guys and that you enjoyed my take on the debates tonight. I think there is talk of another debate happening in January, and when it happens, I'm going to be your guy. I will also try to do shorter videos on maybe like topical issues, stuff that just like kind of happens like day to day, week to week, kind of like my reaction to Kamala Harris dropping out of the race the other day, and maybe something on impeachment soon. But other than that, thank you for watching another episode of Johnny's Jabs. And I will see you guys soon. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy New Year, Happy everything. Take care, guys.